Go. And it does look, Mr. Chair, like we are live now on YouTube.
Okay, we're just going to our First Nation acknowledgement. We're going to do a little different today. We're just going to put it up and leave it posted there for a few minutes. Everybody can have a read. Okay, thank you for that, Melanie. If you can pop that down, thank you. Welcome everybody to our February Board of Directors meeting. Call the meeting to order. Can I get a motion, a mover and a seconder for the adoption of the agenda, please? Moved by Director Windover, second by Director Dunn. Anyone opposed to that motion? Okay, we'll consider that pass. Thank you. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest in anything on today's agenda? Seeing none. Motion to approve the minutes from our first meeting last month, please. Moved by Director Kisebrink, seconded by Director McFadden. Thank you. Anyone opposed to the minutes being adopted? And that's passed. Thank you. No business arising from the minutes, no deputations. Item 7 is a presentation we're going to get from our Senior Citizen Climate Change Monitoring Project. I'll turn it over to Emma. I think you can introduce Rob. Emma, go ahead.
Thank you. So through the chair, introduce Rob. So Rob is our watershed resources technician, and I'm really delighted that we can present today this project to you. So this is a project that we actually received funding for in 2020, but due to the pandemic, we had agreement with federal government to defer that to 2021. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Rob, and just to say Rob did a tremendous job with this project. We also had a summer student, Laura, helping and working with the seniors on this. So my appreciation goes to both of them. So Rob, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Emma, and thank you, members of the board, for having me today to do the presentation. If you just give me 1 sec, I will share my screen. Oops. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
We can, yeah.
Yep, looks
okay,
great.
All right, so the Kawartha Conservation Senior Citizens Climate Change Action Group, as Emma mentioned, we got the funding for this project in 2020, and due to the pandemic, we deferred the start of the project to 2021. So 2021 was our first year of having volunteers active. We received $17,469 from Employment and Social Development Canada. They have a New Horizons for Seniors program. And what that program is meant to do is get volunteers involved in projects and volunteerism. And one of the objectives that we met for their funding guidelines was having seniors use technology, because we use a lot of tech when we do monitoring, and we thought this was an opportunity to get them involved using technology to do some temperature monitoring, things like that. It also gave them the opportunity, due to the pandemic, to get very familiar with getting on and doing either Zoom calls or team calls with us to get training. So rather than doing the training in person or in a large meeting, we did Zoom sessions and small video presentations. So they also had to use technology in that area. So yeah, and then just having them have participation with others. There's meant to be mentoring in this. So there were some members of the group that were more familiar with technology and using applications on their smartphones or tablets. So they were able to connect with one another to ask questions about how to do things. So that also was part of the program objectives. So we went through volunteer recruitment through social media and Facebook, Twitter, things like that. And we have now on our website a really good web page where we can have volunteers sign up. So whenever we had interest through all of our social media outreach, we directed them to our website, and we developed a really good database. It was really good because we had different projects going on at the same time. So people were able to look at which projects they wanted to participate in and then select the ones that were suited for them. So we had a nice database of volunteers to connect with and choose from. The study area for this project, we focused on lakes and rivers in the Kawartha region because it was meant to monitor water temperature and air temperature in the shoreline areas. And volunteers for this project, because it was a seniors program, had to be 65 years and older, and they had to have access to a water body in the Kawartha Lakes. So this is our project area, and we were successful at recruiting 19 volunteers in our first year, which was really good. And we had 6 lakes covered. So you can see where all those little blue raindrops, that's where volunteer stations were. And there was 1 volunteer also on the Burnt River. So we had fairly good coverage of our area. This year, in year 2, we'd like to get a little bit more in the south. We only had a couple of volunteers on Lake Scugog, so it'd be nice to get a little bit bigger geographic distribution in the south. And then, so what were they collecting? So I mentioned air and water temperature, and what we did was we provided each volunteer with 2 of these Bluetooth temperature loggers. And the way they work is they can either set them in the air or the water, but they have to set them up using an application on their smartphone or tablet. So they had to download the app, and then they had to access the logger and set it all up. So that was part of the learning curve for a lot of volunteers, is learning how to use the technology to do all these sorts of things. So initially it was pretty steep, and then a lot of the volunteers got a handle on it pretty quickly. As I mentioned earlier, we provided them training videos. We met with them online to show them things. So kept in communication with them while they were setting up. Once the loggers were deployed, one was put in the air. So somewhere on their property in the shade, so to avoid sunshine. And then one was deployed on their shoreline area 1 meter deep in the water. And then once they started collecting data, they had to upload the data using the app on their phone or tablet, or they had to send the file to us directly through an email. So that was also part of their learning curve. So every month they would go out and they would download the data from their loggers and send it to us. Another part of the project was to have them collect precipitation measurements. So we provided them with a standard precipitation gauge, and you can see one on the right there. Every 24 hours, they're required to take a rainfall measurement in the morning. Again, we provided training on how to do that, the correct way to measure precipitation and take the measurement. And then they had to access our Google Forms. So they had to go online and input their data on their Google Forms. So some volunteers were fairly good at this. Other ones, they chose to write it down and then enter them a little bit later or ask us to enter. But again, give them an opportunity to use tech to get on a website, try something using their computer or their tablet again. So, and we have the results from all their work. So you can see they did collect a lot of data. I'm not presenting all of the data in this presentation. I'm just giving a little bit of a snapshot of what they collected. So over the 4 months of the project period, they collected precipitation at 17 sites. So we did have 2 volunteers that dropped off for precipitation measurement because some of the volunteers weren't able to go out every morning and take a measurement. So some chose not to do the precipitation portion. The graph just shows a little snapshot of all the different precipitation amounts we had at all our different stations. So quite a bit of data coming in when you have some the volunteers inputting the data every day for the entire period of the study time. And then here's a look at the temperature data. So you can see we had air temperature data and water temperature data. So I just put all the data together in a graph so you get a kind of an idea of what that looks like and how much data they collected. And again, it's over a 4-month period, and we had temperature data at 16 sites. Again, some of the volunteers chose not to do the temperature portion because they found the loggers a little bit more difficult, or they just didn't have time to set them up. But Yeah, it's interesting when they collect the data because you see some patterns in the data, and we can see where some of the volunteers had a little bit of trouble. If you look at the bottom on the right, there's a big spike there. So that's where one of the volunteers' logger came out of the water and the temperature just goes way up. So the water temperature never got to almost 35 degrees. That's just a little bit of an error in methodology. So they learn from this and we learn from this to how to improve on the next time around. So some of the results we got from our precipitation data, we see a lot of variation in rainfall between our existing monitoring sites and some of the volunteer stations. Some of that can be attributed to perhaps they collected data over 2 days and input it all on 1 day. So it could look like a lot of rainfall on a 1 day period. But we also noticed that during storm events, we do get a little bit of variation across our jurisdiction. So further north, we can get more rainfall than say at Lindsay or even down in Port Perry. So we picked up a little bit of that in the results. We also see that we have zones in our jurisdiction, which we know a little bit about from our own monitoring, but you can really see them clearly. So in the north, we tend to get big precipitation events. And then in the central area around Lindsay, we don't even get any rain when those are happening, or in the south. So you can see that there's different areas in our jurisdiction when there's storm events. When it comes across our jurisdiction, that it varies quite a bit. And like I said, there may be some error due to availability from the volunteers, whether they could actually do the monitoring, and then consistency as to when they put their data in. So if they couldn't do it every day, sometimes they just had cumulative data. But they did a great job of collecting a lot of data and inputting it online. When we were seeing the data come in, we were impressed with how much data was coming in and how well the volunteers did to collect precipitation data over the entire study period. For temperature, they did a great job of learning the software. That was the big part of the sort of the learning curve for all the volunteers, was to be able to get onto their phones and tablets and use the apps to set up the loggers and then deploy the loggers and actually successfully collect temperature data. When you look at our data consistency, it was really high across all the stations. The top graph there shows Sturgeon Lake, and you can see there's not a lot of variation in that temperature data. So it's nicely done by all volunteers. This is helping us to get a sort of baseline set of data for our lakes, because we don't have a lot of water temperature data on the Kawartha Lakes. And we also found we need to refine some of the things. So as I mentioned earlier, making sure that they don't have sun exposure when they put their logger out, which can really mess with the temperatures, or make sure that they have a spot where the water level is not going to change or it doesn't come out of the water by accident. Even just little things about, you know, some of the volunteers, they don't have a technical experience like us, so they just put a logger on a string and then it fell off and had to root around in the lake to try and find it back and things like that. So we learned a lot from our first year. And then our report's going out to the volunteers, so I just wrapped that up. Part of the time it took was just the amount of data there was, and just QA and QC all the data that came in. But I included a little bit of data that's in the report in our in the presentation today. There's a lot of data in this report. There's a lot of graphs and things like that. So if anybody's interested, we can provide you with the report to go through. But there is a lot of graphical information in there, because it does collect a lot of data over all that area. So yeah, that's basically the project. So is there any questions?
Thanks, Rob. Sounds like a great program. I'll just, if you can pop that screen down for me.
Oh, yeah.
That's okay. And I'll just ask for a motion to receive the presentation, and then we'll see if there's any questions for you. Moved by Director Kiesebrink, second by Director Windover. Any questions for Rob on the presentation? Director Kiesebrink, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to find out if the participants in the program were able to have their names put into that report as well. That might be kind of cool for them, or just
yeah, I didn't. I thank the volunteers in general, but I could include every single one of their names that participated. That's not a big thing to change in the report. So yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, I think that'd be kind of neat, and then to give them a copy of it.
Yep.
That's kind of cool. Something to show your grandkids or something too, like just thinking from their perspective.
Yeah, and that's a good idea, because they like to see their name in print. So that's
yeah. Oh, that's super job. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good idea. Thanks. Any other questions for Rob on the presentation? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive. Anyone opposed to that? Excellent. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the work on that. Great program.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's move down to item 8, staff reports. Our first report is the permits issued by staff in January. I'll turn it over to Mark, but I know, Mark, you wanted to recognize Ashley and the work she's doing on this and the next report in compiling these reports for you. So go ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report that you have before you is a summary of the permitting activity for January, and as the chair mentioned, I'd like to recognize Ashley for her efforts. She does a great job in making sure permits are processed and out the door. So many thanks to her efforts. The report indicates that we were just slightly over on a couple of permits, and that was mainly due to the Christmas period. We did just report the information as it comes out of the database, but technically we are allowed to allocate statutory holidays as non-eligible. So if you take that into account, we actually met all the timelines, but anyways, just presented it here for you. And if there's any questions on the specific information, be happy to address that as well.
Any questions for Mark on the permitting report, 8.1? Director McFadden, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks again for that report. I absolutely love how that information is laid out. It's visual. You've got the contextual background laid out in the tables, but the graphic speaks clearly to the timelines. It's easy to go through. I guess just more to staff. Is there any way you could send me just those reports just as one item as opposed to the entire agenda? That specifically, I'd like to just bring to the attention of my council, because we deal with 3 conservation authorities, and I really like how you've laid that out. And I don't want to bring forward your whole agenda and have them find it. Just send me that one report if you don't mind. I don't know whether others are interested, but I'm quite amazed at how well you've been doing that.
Yep. Thank you, Vice Chair McFadden. That's not a problem. We'll definitely send that to you. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Send them one of the reports where we've hit them all at 100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, perfect. Any other questions? Okay, we got a motion here. The following section 28 permits issued by staff be received. New permits, permits revised, permits extended, and that the permitting performance report be received, please. Moved by Director Dunn, seconded by Director Smith. Anyone opposed to that? And that's passed. Thank you. 8.2 is the annual permitting report. Go ahead, Mark.
Yep, thank you. And this is the roll-up of the entire year. So we've voluntarily participated in the client service initiative, and that includes reporting on the calc standards. So we're happy to participate in that. That will be expanding to all 36 CAs starting, I believe, this year. And so we've been a part of this for a couple years now. And so we find it's a great opportunity to kind of highlight how we've done over the course of the year. The information is summarized in a couple of tables. One is the annual reporting that we've been doing for a couple of years, and we've added a second table this year. That is the information that is forwarded on to Conservation Ontario. So that summarizes different classes of permits in relation to both the calc standards, which have been adopted by Conservation Ontario and by this board, and it also includes the current provincial standards, which of course are a little bit bigger than our current calc standards. So you see from that table, it's table 3 in the report, page 21 of the agenda. There's two different permits that were outside of the timelines provided, and one was due to some technical expertise that was needed on a permit. The other was an application that was actually applied for in June, but the work was going on in December, in the winter time when there's ice on the lakes. So those accounted for those two pieces, some streamlining and some scheduling. All other permits met the provincial guidelines, and you see there's 10 permits that didn't meet our calc timelines. But overall, that's a pretty impressive number that was compliant in 98% actually met our calc timeframes. So that's just wanted to share that. And tied in with that was we received 11% more permits this year. So not only do we receive more permits, we also improved on our performance. So so some great work by Ashley and also by Ron, because Ron was a piece of this as well for last year. He was busy approving all the permits and of course working with staff as well on that. So this year we've also tried to put things in a more visual format. I'm pretty big on making sure the information is visual and understandable. So tables are great. They summarize to an extent, but we've included a more visually appealing permit report that summarizes this information as well. So we present that to you.
Yeah, great, Mark. Thank you. And I really like the graph and the visual I guess you're talking about on page 22. Be awesome if something like that could go up on our website just as a recap of last year on how we're hitting some of those timelines. That's a great visual for sure. Any questions for Mark on the annual report? Director Smith, go ahead.
Yeah, and more a comment than a question, but once again, I think the staff has done a great job and met some very difficult timelines and difficult circumstances with between COVID and higher volume of permits required or requested. So well done. Thank you, and a great report. Thank you.
Agree. Thanks for that. Can I get a motion then that the annual permitting performance report for 2021 be received, please?
I'll give you
Director Smith, you'll move that. Director Kiesebrink, you'll second that. Anyone opposed to that motion? And that's passed. So thank you, Mark, and thank you, Ashley, for putting that together. Appreciate it. Okay, let's move down to the CAO's report, 8.3. Back over to you, Mark.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. The summary of activity over the last month is presented for your information. I'll just touch on a couple of the highlights by department, and then if there's any questions, certainly be happy to answer them. Corporate services, we were pretty busy developing the inventory of programs and services, so that was a pretty major focus in the department. And the province also released a couple of different legislation that was also important to review. Those are included in the agenda package as well. So there's a phase 2 regulation consultation guide that was released by the province. And the ministry also posted advertisements for agricultural board members. So that is something that is identified within the Conservation Authorities Act as a possibility. We've included that in our administrative bylaws, and the ministry is now looking to fill those positions based on interest and minister approval. We're pretty busy on the communications front and on the finance front. On communications, we're revising our Spring in the Kawarthas webpage, so making sure that some seasonal activities tied in with some of the economic opportunities with our municipalities are working together. And on finance end, a lot of year-end work going on, tidying up the year, and also T4s, which takes a bit of time as well. Some hiring as well during this time frame, and job recruitment. So we do have a new member, which we can introduce maybe at the next board meeting. Callie Burke has joined us as a conservation areas technician, and this is a great good news story. She was a summer student, did really well, and now she was successful in the job competition. So we're really happy to have her back with us. Planning, I think planning and permitting, I think we've seen some of the work that's been going on with the calc standards and reporting. So lots of work going on there, pretty busy. Some regulation items as well, and some planning files that we're busy on. And in source water, which you'll see next board meeting, annual reporting efforts are underway. And something of note in source water protection is that we are exploring an interim basis for risk management official services, which will bring in a little bit of revenue for that service for Minden Hills. They don't have a RMO currently, so this would provide them with an opportunity and give us a little bit of revenue as well. terms of stewardship activities, really just busy with a whole bunch of stewardship projects getting ready for spring, looking at some tree planting opportunities as well, and receiving some funds with some of the granting programs that we have. We did have a tie-in with Bell Let's Talk forest walks, which was great too. They supplied us with some materials as well to support the initiative, and it was a great walk and very well received. We also have a new partnership that we've struck with Wild Rock Outfitters in Peterborough, and something that this does is it encourages people to come out to the conservation area. And one thing that we don't have are a lot of resources for things that people need to hike if they don't have those. So an example, for instance, snowshoes or canoeing. We don't have a lot of canoes, for instance, that people could use. So this kind of is a great partnership where people come out to the conservation areas, but Wild Rock supplies all the resources, and of course we do see some revenues as a result as well. So very, very good. There's a night walk that was held as well, and we look forward to this kind of relationship continuing. And then there's a lot of work going on a couple other projects as well. Certainly, as you saw with Rob's presentation, it's just one aspect of the work that we're doing with our information and trying to make sure it's represented in an easy manner and makes sense for everyone. So that's a pretty big initiative within that department across all of the monitoring that we do. And you can stay tuned for some additional displays of that work in the future. So with that, maybe I'll just stop it there and see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Certainly lots going on. Thanks for that. Any questions for Mark on the CAO's report? Director Hooper, welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark, I just wanted to make a query. Under the planning, development, and engineering, it says follow up on several reported complaints and resulting existing violations. Can you just sort of enlighten us a little bit on that? Is that a perceived as far as the development industry, or is that something that we should be on top of?
Yeah, it's you're right. It is a combination of both. So we do receive a number of complaints across the watershed, and what we have is our regulations officer goes and investigates those. Some end up being items that we're already aware of, and some it might be some additional work that might be occurring on some properties. Some of them are not in our jurisdiction, and some, but we get reports, so we pass them on to an appropriate authority. And then in other locations, it may not apply to our regulated area at all, even though it might look like it's in a wet area, but it's not actually part of the regulations. So there's a lot of follow-up activity that occurs. Some of it is in the regulation, and those are the ones that we do follow up on. So the percentage of those that are in regulation versus not, I mean, we can probably work on a statistic for you, but it's definitely not 100%, and probably more in the range of 40 to 60% are ones that we would have to follow up on. So,
okay, thank you for that. And a couple other things I just want to say. Congratulations to staff on the forest therapy and the story walks. I hate to say this, but I think I might have sort of swapped some ideas from the story walks and put them in the northern part of one of our conservation area authorities at the end of Skillen, and we used some of those there. So it's a very successful program, and I just want to say thank you for the idea, and we sort of implemented it down here too as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. More people that can enjoy that kind of activity, I think it's the best. So yeah, that's awesome that it's spreading around.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
You bet. Any other questions? Director Kiesebrink, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to our CAO for this report. I would like to welcome Callie Burke. It's pretty great that we have Fleming College in our community, that she can graduate from that fish and wildlife program and then transition from being summer seasonal to now being our conservation area technician. That's really amazing. So it's nice to see people homegrown like that. I just had a question about the risk management officer for the municipality of Minden Hills. What all is involved in facilitating those duties, and does that impact any duties that are currently required of staff that would be putting in that double duty role?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, that's an excellent question, and we've taken a look at that. We anticipate there wouldn't be very many. There's a couple of systems that would require some attention if it was needed, but we plan on scoping those responsibilities, and that would be the most urgent pieces that the municipality would look at us maybe taking on. There would be an agreement with Minden Hills in order to facilitate that. And we do have a risk management official on board, Ms. Jenna Stevens. And so she has all the qualifications as part of our memorandum of understanding with the City of Kawartha Lakes. So she's fully engaged on that element. There is a huge learning curve, and we understand that Minden Hills is looking at retaining someone for those services. So we anticipate it to be a short term, but even still with the volume, we don't anticipate it'll be an issue for us. So we anticipate it wouldn't be a whole lot of additional work, but we definitely want to make sure that there's the appropriate background and agreements and authority from Minden Council to appoint our RMO as applicable for their territory. So
yeah, and I do think it's important that we support each other. So that's great. It sounds like you've covered the bases. I did want to, if I could, Mr. Chair, say thank you very much for the meetings that Kawartha Conservation has had with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Parks Canada, Transport Canada, MOE, Ministry of Environment, and what have you, regarding the Lake Scugog Enhancement Project. Everybody is so anxious to see that project get its final approvals and begin construction, but putting together that I think it was the fish habitat plan. Is there a timing on that and when that will be complete?
Yeah, thank you again through you, Mr. Chair. That is a good question, and what we're trying to do is push the yardsticks forward every time. Every time we meet, every time we're trying to figure out a way forward on that. So obviously we would have wanted to start that as soon as possible with of course the township and lake stewards on that project. So we are trying to push forward on that, trying to achieve the milestones, and really it's the review process and trying to make sure that the government agencies are satisfied with the approach. So we are looking at ways that would help streamline that and maybe get over some of those hurdles. So the timing on that is really a matter of resolving those issues.
Okay. And just one further comment, if I could, Mr. Chair, just congratulations on selling out that April septic course. I thought that was a very valuable tool to provide the public, and it looks like the public responded. So super job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mark on the report? Can I get a mover and a seconder that the CAO monthly report be received? Director Dunn and Vice Chair McFadden, thank you. Anyone opposed to that? That's passed. Thank you. And we'll go down to item 8.4, which is correspondence. Is there anything in there you want to highlight, Mark, in the correspondence just to be received? Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just to be received. And I'll just highlight maybe the last point, which is agricultural sector representatives. So that is, as I mentioned in my CIO report, something that the province has put out. It is, I would call, a developing file for the province. So I did sit in on a conference call with the province and CAOs of the conservation authorities, just trying to hammer out some of the details and indicate some of our concerns that should be identified in the vetting process for individuals, mainly tied in with regulations and hearings, and making sure there isn't active violations for any members that the ministry might consider, since there's been a couple of instances where that has occurred at the board level with hearings. So and it, from what I hear, causes some difficulties. So that's one of the items that was highlighted. The per diems would be funded by the province. So that's something else that was confirmed.
Okay. Any questions, other questions for Mark on the correspondence? Director Smith, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair Leffin, through you to Mr. Mahowski. Just on the agricultural representation, considering, there's cash croppers, there's people that have livestock that are obviously producing manure, there's market gardeners, there's tree farms. How many sectors of agriculture can be represented, and considering everyone might have a different perspective on it, I see that as a difficult issue, and I guess these are, am I correct in assuming these are non-voting, just input?
Yes, that's thank you through you, Mr. Chair. That you do raise a number of excellent points. So I think the ministry is just considering agriculture as agriculture and not differentiating between sector groups. So it would follow an appointment process. So it's posted on the Public Services Sector Board, and applications are received and then evaluated from there. So there is no real distinction that way. It's really by minister approval after that point. So the minister just has to be satisfied that the individual would meet the terms that the minister would identify. And part of that would be, being a functional member of the Conservation Authority boards. The question about voting, that's outlined in the Conservation Authorities Act. So the member would be a full voting member, aside from budget and other big matters like dissolution or amalgamation.
All right. Thank you. I just typical with agriculture, it's hard to get one voice that represents everyone, and just something that we'll have to work with, I guess, and see how it works out. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mark? Can I get a mover and a seconder? The correspondence be received, please. Director Hooper, seconded by Director Windover. Anyone opposed to that? Okay, that's passed. Thanks, Mark. 9.1 is the inventory of programs and services. I'll turn it over to you, Mark. A lot of information in here. I'm sure you're not going to go through it line by line with us, but I'll turn it over to you for the Coles Notes version. Go ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so this is the program and services inventory. This is something that's required by regulation. It has to be supplied to the minister and municipalities on Monday. So what it does is it really looks at all of the programs and services that we offer currently and translates it into the different categories that are identified in the regulation. And those are laid out in the board report. Category 1 are those that are mandatory, and there's a list of those mandatory services that are provided for in the regulation. Includes things, really the key ones are natural hazards and conservation areas, and select monitoring programs. It also, in a general sense, also includes corporate support services, which are identified in a different way, but are essentially considered mandatory. There's category 2 programs, and those that are performed on request or behalf of a municipality. So those would fit in the category of our special projects and special benefiting projects for municipalities. Lake management plans and the implementation of them are good examples, or through memorandum of understanding, and that would be related to our tree servicing agreement with Durham, and also with our risk management official MOU with the city as a couple of examples. And category 3 is basically everything else that doesn't fit in those 2 categories. So things that the board defines as advisable. So the we've listed out the programs according to that. Doesn't exactly match our budget, so we've done our best to translate that into this inventory. It does represent primarily 4 years of historical average, because of course we had our 2020 year, which was extremely atypical. So that's a note in the inventory. And we've also indicated in there we hit all the regulatory components, which programs are new, the categories that are contained within that. We identified some special notes where it might be a category 1, but really we operate as a category 2. So for instance, floodplain mapping is identified as a mandatory service, but we look at that as a special benefiting program with municipalities. So that's an example of that. I won't run through any of the details in terms of the individual categories, but what I will say is that when you crunch out all the numbers, the category 1 programs end up being about 70% of the work that we do. 25% are category 2, and category 3 are about 5%, with about 1% of that being entirely self-generated revenues. So that's the Coles notes of the inventory. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I really like the way you've laid it out in the chart. It sort of gives you a pretty good perspective on the scope of the work that the Conservation Authority does and offers. So it was a lot of information, but a fairly easy report to read. So thank you for that. Any questions for Mark on anything in that report? There is a motion that the inventory of program services be approved, that the inventory of program services be circulated to our member municipalities, the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, and be made publicly available on our website. I need a mover and a seconder for that, please. Director Kieserbrink, you'll move it. Director Dunn, you'll second it. Thank you. And that has to be posted by February 28th. Is that right, Mark?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any further questions? Anyone opposed to that motion? Okay, that's done. Thank you. 9.2 is a regulatory and policy proposal consultation guide, phase 2 regulations. Mark, go ahead.
Yep, thank you. So this report is tied in with the release of the phase 2 regulations by the province, and this is open right now for consultation. Actually closes tomorrow. It's really built upon the good work of the working group, which I know our vice chair is a part of. So on behalf of the working group and Vice Chair McFadden, great job working out some of the details on this, because I think the comments that I've read the report and run through it, and really we have some pretty minor comments as a result of all the hard work that the working group has done. The regulation deals with municipal levy provisions, Conservation Authority budget process, the charging of fees, and then some additional matters for kind of consideration in terms of transparency and making things work at the administrative level in an accountable and open manner. So the first part deals with the municipal levies regulation, and really what this does is it incorporates the standards and policies that we currently have and puts it into regulation. So there won't be a whole lot of changes in terms of what we're doing on that end. There are some voting methods that are outlined. It can get maybe a little bit confusing, but what does occur right now in our budget process meets what the regulation is identifying. And there's a few additional kind of administrative components which would be required. For instance, self-generating revenue would have to be outlined specifically in the notice to municipalities, and we'd have to post or provide a final budget to the minister. We already posted on our website in both a draft and a final form. So that would be the one additional component. Everything else, by and large, is fine. There's some apportionment methods that are identified, and this provides, I would say, some flexibility across conservation authorities in terms of how different initiatives are funded. And again, that's nothing new for what we're looking at. We might have to realign our budget for a couple of the categories, and that also is a part and parcel of the overall inventory of program and service inventory. So we'll look at some options for that as we work through this process, but nothing that can't be overcome. The part 2 deals with source water, and that's the key one for us. It also deals with the Lake Simcoe Protection Act, but the key one for us is source water. This is one that is probably our most outstanding comment, which is there's a parallel budget process essentially proposed for this component. The great thing is the promises also outline that there's no anticipated change to provincial funding, but they kind of had to put this in as a way of addressing some of the outstanding legislative elements without a background for how to address it. So the end result for us would be complicated, is how I would call it. So we would have a complementary budget process, which means we'd have probably 2 additional meetings of the board where we'd invite Haliburton County. And then there's the apportionment side of things, which would be something that some additional guidance would be required, because depending on how you identify the apportionment, if it was by system, for instance, we have a number of municipalities that don't have any system. And so they would be non-voting for the source water component. So, it's something that would be doable, but would certainly have to be worked out and some guidance on that end. So as an example, there's minimum levies, which are part of the existing process for conservation authority budgets, and whether or not that's a component in source water would be something that could be contemplated or not. But that would be one element that I can see being potentially confusing. Part 3 deals with charging of fees, and so there's a couple elements that we don't currently have that we'd have to put in. We don't have a fee policy, but we have a fee schedule, but it's a good idea. So I think realistically, it's a good way of moving forward. The only comment we have here is they identify in their different categories in the classes of fees, which are all based on user pay principle, which makes sense. And the only comment we have is that in category 3, there might be some benefit from a slightly wider definition. So that's the only comment we have there. And then the fourth part of that proposal identifies essentially a new governance section on the website. We have something like that currently. We just have to post a little bit more detail in there. So when there's a new MOU, we'd have to give notice of that on our website and just make sure we have all governance pieces in one area. So and that's really the comments. We did put in or suggested a comment as well that province could consider funding for some of these temporary or permanent measures over and above the existing apportionment. So that's the other comment that we've provided for board consideration. I don't expect anything come of it, but we wanted to just highlight that there would be some additional costs and consideration would be appreciated. So.
Thanks, Mark. I wish you the best of luck on that last comment, and fully support your request. Any questions for Mark on the report? Vice Chair McFadden, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And to Mark, I know you'll articulate those details in the letter that you'll have sent off by the 28th. I don't know whether it's standard practice to also send that out to us as board members, but if you do include me specifically on those correspondence, I can certainly more clearly articulate to the working group some of the concerns that you've raised today to bring those forward. So, and if I do have any questions as to your letter prior to, then I can certainly go through that and review, and I'll raise my questions with you. But I can certainly bring those concerns forward to the working group.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, we have a motion that the staff report of Phase 2 regulations supporting the legislative updates to the Conservation Authorities Act be received and comment provided within the report submitted to the Environmental Registry of Ontario. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Director Kiesebrink, second by Director Smith. Final questions? Anyone opposed to that motion? We'll consider that passed. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Sub-watershed planning guidance. This one is Emma and Brett are going to give us an overview. It's certainly a substantial report, so we'll request the Coles notes, Emma, or we'll be here till it's dark, but I'll turn it over to you and we'll go from there, you and Brett. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Through the chair, I will keep it very brief. So this piece of guidance that has come out, as you say, is quite substantial. This is aiming to modernise guidance that was released back in 1993. So we're really looking for a big update here. So it's looking at the whole integrating watershed and sub-watershed planning into land use planning as a whole. So this document was released in January this year, so January 27th. We have until tomorrow to get comments back to Conservation Ontario, who are pulling together all the CA responses. And we have until March the 13th to get our comments onto the registry. I guess high-level comments, which I've summarised in the paper here, two key ones really. We are in general really supportive of the guidance document. It's providing some consistency and clarity on watershed planning as an approach, and really kind of identifies the expertise that conservation authorities bring to the table, and obviously working in partnerships with local municipalities to carry those out. I would also say the other key point here, many of the changes proposed by the Conservation Authorities Working Group in 2017 and 18 have been addressed. So Brett, who is on the call today, was part of that working group and has been closely involved with this. So we did provide comments back in 2017-18, which were incorporated in the overall Conservation Ontario response. So I think as an overall summary, I'd say, the publication is providing a transparent and standardised approach for us to undertake watershed planning. And it's just really helping to facilitate responsible development among our municipalities. So we are looking today from the board for support to submit comments to Conservation Ontario and also to the Environmental Registry of Ontario. And that is all I would like to say on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Brett, is there anything you want to add? Anything to add to Emma's comments, or are you good?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm okay. I'm here to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you both. Any questions for Brett or Emma regarding that guidance document? Well, there you go. You nailed it. Baffled us with the report or nailed it, one or the other. Well, I got a motion that resolved that the staff report on the sub-watershed planning guidance be received and comments as provided for in the attachment of the report be submitted to Conservation Ontario and the Environmental Registry of Ontario. If I can get a mover to seconder, we'll do a final call for comments. Moved by Director Windover, thank you. Second by Director Hooper. Any final comments or questions? Anyone opposed to that motion? And that's passed. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. Okay, our last action item is the consideration of land acquisition, and Christy's going to give us an overview on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may recall a little while ago, I think it was back in January or maybe December, we were talking about the management plan for Ken Reid Conservation Area, and there is a section of Ken Reid that is actually owned by the city, and we have a 50-year lease for $1 in order to manage it as part of the property because it's right sort of in the center of Ken Reid Conservation Area. And it was suggested at that time that, we look to city staff to see if there was an opportunity for us to bring that piece of property into the ownership of Kawartha Conservation and therefore, manage it as a single property. And so we've done some exploratory conversations and have been requested to submit a report to the city requesting the transfer of that property. for the cost of, the transfer fees to Kawartha Conservation. And they'll be taking it forward to their committee if we submit that report on the 14th of March. So I think that sort of summarizes the report. If there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Great, thank you. Any
welcome.
questions? Director Dunn, go ahead.
Just a question: is there any cost associated? Is there any cost associated to us owning the land, not acquiring it, just to taxes, increased stuff?
Sure. Yeah. The through you, Mr. Chair, the current carrying costs of that property are carried by Kawartha Conservation as was laid out in the terms of the lease. So we're currently paying the property taxes on it anyway.
You good with that,
Yeah.
Director Dunn?
Yeah, just without, and I don't care what the exact amount is, but is it a substantial amount? As in, if we just let the city have it anyway and continue to own it and pay them their buck, they would, you know what I mean? Do we save any money is what I'm trying to say.
No, we don't save any money, or like it doesn't save us any money to keep it in the city's ownership or the other side of things.
Okay. All right.
The only thing it does do is it reduces. So whenever we do any improvements on the property, so we have put in a parking lot on that property. We put in a playground. We just did an accessible washroom a couple of years ago on that property. So every time we do those things, we have to go through a process of getting city approval in order to do those types of improvements. Yeah.
I'm fine. I support the motion.
Yeah, no, I do as well. Director Smith and then Hooper, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair Latham, through you. Certainly, it seems like a very wise move, and appreciate the fact that City of Kawartha Lakes is willing to cooperate in this manner. Just a question. I'm looking at the satellite photo. The yellow line, I assume, is the boundaries of Ken Reed, and the red line is what we would acquire. So everything on between the yellow line and the red line we already own?
That's correct.
All right. So that is an odd shaped property. Certainly, we might as well have it all under the control and ownership of the Conservation Authority. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Director Hooper, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I totally agree. It's a significant and a good investment. I just wonder, looking to the future for infrastructure improvements of that piece of property, is there some significant investment that will have to be made in regards to that? Or are we pretty much, not unlike what Mr. Dunn was talking about, Director Dunn was talking about?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. The property, all of the improvements on the property in the past have always been at our expense anyway. So anything that's currently there that needs maintenance would fall to us regardless. There's no pending, repairs or anything to existing infrastructure. We are looking to do potentially an improvement to the playground should funding come through, but that would have fallen to us as an expense anyway.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So can we get a follow-up on this to see how it goes after your land management or the Realty Services Committee meeting on March 14th?
Absolutely.
This obviously sometimes, the city, lack of a policy in place, and there becomes some kind of roadblock for some various reason. But there's no reason Councillor Dunn and I couldn't take this to council if that was the case. If there was, if the board wanted to go that direction, and if it was turned down. So I think we'd be certainly open to that. But let's see how it goes at the land management group first. So keep us posted, please.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any further questions for Christy? Can I get a motion then that staff explore the opportunity to transfer title to Kawartha Conservation for a 14-hectare parcel as a donation, and if acceptable to the City of Kawartha Lakes, proceed with the land transfer? Mover and a seconder. Director Kieserbrink will move. Director Windover will second it. Anyone opposed to that? Okay, that's passed. Thank you. new business, that's our action items. New business, the only thing I just wanted to have a brief discussion about is the board meetings. Obviously, as we're coming out of this pandemic, we should probably look at somewhere down the road having in-person meetings again. Easy for me to say, I'm 5 minutes from the Conservation Authority, but I do respect that that was how we're set up to operate. I do, I'm not certainly not proposing for March. I mean, we got to see how things unfold over the next little while, but I'm just wondering if you'd be open to the idea. March and April are our source water protection meetings, and asking our folks to come down from Halliburton would be quite a journey, as well as what you folks have, some of you folks have. So I'm kind of looking at, if nothing changes and things continue in a good direction, maybe picking up on our in-person board meetings in May. And I just, certainly not a policy or anything. Is anybody opposed to sort of targeting that at this point? And yeah, we can certainly update ourselves as we go along, but if nobody has any fierce objections, we'll sort of pencil that in and keep us posted over the next couple of meetings. Does that seem to work for everyone?
I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks. Okay, let's do that then, if there's no objections. Are there any reports or updates from board members on anything anyone who wants to bring to the rest of the board's attention? Seeing nothing, we do have a couple items in closed session, so I'll just ask for a motion to go into close, please. Director Kieserbrink, Director Hooper, anyone opposed to that? Okay, let's go into